All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webcast on how to get more work from your Salesforce workflow. My name is Joanne Casley, and I am on the business development team here at GSI, and I support our Salesforce practice. I'm very pleased to introduce our presenters for today's webcast, Dave Telford and Oleg Chernyak. Dave is a 25-year IT veteran with experience in nearly every aspect of information technology. He joined GSI in May of 2007 and was part of the team architecting the firm's merger with enterprise solutions providers in 2008. Today, Mr. Telford leads the team responsible for the development of GSI software products, including Rapid Approval for Salesforce, G Shield security tools and Rapid Reconciler for JD Edwards, and Genius Advanced Monitoring for any web-based business-critical system. He also heads up GSI's Salesforce.com practice. Dave holds a Bachelor of Science in Information Technology from UMass and is a certified Salesforce System Administrator and certified Salesforce Sales Cloud Consultant. Oleg has over 15 years of consulting experience, is a certified Salesforce System Administrator, and has extensive experience in delivery and managing the implementation of many large ERP systems across several industries. A little over 2 years ago, Oleg transitioned into a pre-sales role and is now a senior solutions consultant here at GSI. Oleg uses his background to partner with clients in order to come up with the best possible solution to meet their business needs. Oleg holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Information Systems. We're very happy to have them on, and I'll be turning the presentation over to them in just a few minutes. But first, I want to give you a chance to review our Safe Harbor statement. All right. And now for a quick agenda of today's webcast, which should last about 45 to 55 minutes. First, we'll go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. Then I'll provide a brief company overview before turning it over to Oleg and Dave for the main presentation. At the end of the presentation, we'll go over our upcoming educational events and then wrap up with a 10-minute Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question during the webcast, you can do so through the GoToWebinar console window, which should be on the right side of your screen now. Please note that we do address all questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation so you can see your whole screen, just click that red right-facing arrow, which should be on the top left of the console. All right, now for a brief overview of GSI. GSI was founded in 2004, and we now have offices nationwide with a global reach. We have over 100 employees and have been recognized twice on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in the U.S. We're the only company in the industry to offer a 100% guarantee on all of our services. GSI is an Oracle Platinum Partner, Salesforce ISV Partner, and NetSuite Partner. We are also a charter member of the JD Edwards Global Alliance and are one of only 3 Oracle Cloud MSP providers. We specialize in project consulting and managed services, and in summary, we're a one-stop shop for JD Edwards, but mostly everything cloud. In addition, we are a forward-thinking product development company that has many popular products, including Genius, an advanced monitoring and performance analytics solution for any business-critical system on any platform, Genesis, our load and stress testing application for system design, validation, or expansion that can be used on any web-based business-critical system, G Shield, GSI's two-factor authentication and password reset solution for JD Edwards, Rapid Approval, which is an enhanced user experience for processing workflow approval requests and time and expense approvals in Salesforce, JDE Cloud 9, which is our private hosting solution for JD Edwards, and finally, Rapid Reconciler, which is GSI's Oracle-validated tool for inventory in transit and received not vouchered reconciliation. Now, I would like to turn things over to Oleg and Dave for the main presentation. All right.
All right. Thank you very much, Joanne. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us and taking some time out of your busy days, especially on a Friday. We hope that first and foremost, this is going to be an informative webinar and are excited to have you here. As Joanne mentioned, we are going to be talking about Salesforce workflows and a little more to the point, Salesforce automation. And as a basic rule in life, we are many times inundated with a lot of manual work, and especially as the business grows, there's more and more demand. And nowadays, with information overload, it's very difficult to do your work without being pulled left and right with other information. So fortunately, with the use of automation, we can take a lot of that time-consuming manual tasks and turn that into consistent, systematic, and automated process, which in return yields for a happy end user, and that hopefully also gives us back productivity and a little better lifestyle. So what are some of the benefits for Salesforce automation? Well, for one, increased adoption and usability. The number one complaint for any CRM system is its usability. And users, and I will say especially for sales users who are really focused on developing relationships with their clients and spending time on the road, struggle with entering information that they may not deem to have an immediate value. Now, that's not always true in the sense that that information may not appear to be valuable, but for a system that is dependent on data, it is. And the result of that information not being entered into the system results in a downstream impact. So we have a domino effect, and in that case, that means that other people downstream will feel frustrated that information is not coming to them, and they will then in turn decide that, well, maybe they don't need to enter information, and all of a sudden you get a system with bad data, and our system is only as good as our data. So Salesforce workflow automation can offload that mundane, repetitive tasks from your producers. That's going to help free up their time to focus on more revenue-centric behaviors. And having this capability is going to provide a more positive impact on creating, hopefully, a richer user experience. Another one is improve customer satisfaction. So improving time and consistency of communication with our clients. For example, if we have the ability to have the system that would answer the questions of where are we now, what's the status, for example, of my case or project, the Salesforce automation can provide that, which in return, as a result, will enhance the quality of perception and help create client satisfaction. And it'll reduce errors and increase data consistencies. And as I mentioned, nowadays, because we're so inundated with information, it's important to make sure that our data is as accurate as possible, and having a system that automates that process will enable us to reduce those errors and increase data consistency because we are reliant on our system. The result of that is going to be reduction in errors and improved data accuracy. So with today, what we're going to be covering as part of Salesforce automation, and I will say that Salesforce has taken automation to task and is improving and implementing more tools that allow users to implement automation. The key when determining how to best automate is to know what are your needs, because that's going to drive the type of tools that are going to work best for you. For example, do you prefer a tool that is user-friendly, has a user-friendly design, it's easy easy to integrate? Or do you prefer something, or maybe require something that involves something that's much more hands-on, has full customization? So part of what we're going to be covering today is a suite of Salesforce automation tools, and there are going to be things that are pretty simple to use, that if you're not a very, let's say if you're a system admin and you don't have a lot of experience with Salesforce, it's things that you can do pretty quickly. And then it's also look at the other spectrum of tools that are more complicated, however, have a lot more capabilities. So what we're going to be covering today is going to be summary fields. We'll cover process builder. We'll cover workflow, approvals, and the visual workflow. And as we do that, we're going to be looking at pros and cons for each one of these capabilities. We'll do a little demo in between so you can see what it actually looks like in the system, and then we'll talk about best practices. I would say that at the end of this webinar, I don't think anyone is going to come away being an expert Salesforce automation, but hopefully you leave here with a little more confidence of knowing that you've got tools at your disposal, and also know that you've got partners that are here to assist and help you as you need it. So with that, let's get started. We'll start with summary fields, and a summary field is essentially it's a roll-up field is what it's called, and it calculates values from a set of related records. What it's going to do is it's going to automatically display a value in the master record, and that is based on the information that's in the detail. It's important to know that in order to use the summary field, you have to use a master detail relationship, and that's a parent-child relationship. In other words, you can't use a lookup type. So there are a few different type of calculations that can be done with summary fields, and you can do a count, which gives you the overall count of your detail records. Sum, which can come up with which basically a summary of certain fields. Min and max. And I'm just going to throw a couple of examples here, and then we'll jump into the demo here that David's going to help us with. In this example, you can see that, and by the way, this example is in Lightning, so if you don't use Lightning, this might look a little different, but you can see here that in this case, you've got a summary calculation, and so it's got a total dollar value for all the opportunities under this account. In this example here, you're seeing that that there's a calculation on the date first opportunity created, and in here we're seeing a total list price. Okay, so with that, I am going to turn this over to Dave to do the demo.
Great, thanks, Oleg. Good summary there of the summary. I'm going to put my screen up here, and I'm just going to walk in how this works real easily. We're going to do some fairly simple demos of these different types of tools, but I'm hoping that through these simple demos you can see, one, how somewhat easy these tools are to use, and two, maybe spawn some ideas in your own mind about things that you can provide to your own organization. So sharing my screen right now. First thing you need to know is you're going to go into setup for all of these tools, and if you haven't done it yet, get very familiar with the quick find, because then you can easily jump rather than having to navigate through the menus. So in the quick find, we're going to type. What I want to do is I'm going to set up an account summary field that looks at the opportunities and only summarizes the closed won opportunity. So I want to have an idea in my account of what is the total revenue value of this account in my system. So I'm going to go to account for the account record, and I'm going to go down. I'm going to customize the fields because I'm going to be adding a field to it. So I'll scroll down here to the custom fields that I'm going to build, and I'm going to hit new. Now, if a master field does not actually have a detail record in a master detail relationship, This roll-up summary option here for what field type it is will be grayed out. You'll only see this when you're creating at the master record level, when you're creating something that's based on detail records in a master detail relationship. So there's the roll-up summary. I'm going to click next. I'm going to call this field total revenue. And hopefully you can keep up with me here. You can put a description in there if you like, call it whatever you want. It's always good to put a description in to help somewhat document your changes. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this screen here and I'm going to select the summarized object. So the summarized object under the account, it's only giving us the choice of opportunities because this is a pretty standard plain Jane org that we're working out of. So I'm going to select the opportunities and I'm going to say I want to do a summary. And the summary is going to be of the amount field. So again, we can count records, we can summarize records and total them up. We can pick the maximum and minimum values, but we're going to do the summary of this one here. Now, again, I said I only want to look at I only want to summarize those fields that have been part of a closed won opportunity. I don't want to have anything that's currently open. I don't want to have anything that has been lost. Only the value of the opportunities that have actually contributed to our revenue. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say only records meeting certain criteria should be included. And the criteria is going to be that the stage equals, and when I click here, because stage is a pick list value, when I click here, it's going to say, give me the list. I'm going to say closed won. I'm going to assert that value. So now what I'm saying is I want the sum of the amounts of the opportunities when the stage equals closed won. And then I hit next. Now it's going to ask me where I want to put it, where I want this field to, or who's going to be able to see this field. And I'm going to leave these as defaults. You'll notice that all the way down the side, it's read only for this summary field, is because it's a computed field. Formula fields do this as well. It's a computed field, so it's only read only. You can't edit the value of that field once it's on the page. And it's defaulting into a similar type of a security that's already been set up for accounts. I'm just going to leave that as is for now, but under your own permissions model, you'll want to determine who can see that value and who can't. I'll hit next, and then it's going to ask me which page layouts do I want this field to appear on. Defaults to all of them. I'm going to leave it as a default, but you can see that there's a standard page layout for accounts, and then there are 3 other separate page layouts for accounts based on marketing, sales, and support. I'm going to leave that for all of them so they all get to see it, and then I'm just going to hit save. Now I've created this field. Fantastic. What am I going to do with it? Well, I can't really do much with it until I can see it. So I'm actually going to go over to our accounts here, and if you can see, I'll just do a refresh because I just did do a change. You can see my basic layout for a listing of all accounts. It's basically just showing me the account name and the state where that account exists. I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to add that field that I've just created, total revenue. I'm going to add it to the list. I'm going to let it be visible to everybody because we're not putting any permissions on it yet. And when I hit save, you'll see as we come back, this is the computed field we just created. So this is the value for the Burlington Textiles, $235,000 worth of revenue in all closed won opportunities. Anything that's got 0, they're either active opportunities that haven't been closed or they're closed lost opportunities, but all of the closed won opportunities are summarized up here in this field so you can actually see. You could, if you wanted to, sort based on find out who your largest contributing client is. So that field becomes very valuable. And again, you can't change it because it's a read-only field. And so visibility to the right people is important, and understanding that they can't change it unless opportunities close. So Oleg, that's the summary field. I'm going to hand it back to you. You can go through the next one. Sounds
good. Thank you. All right. So as you can see, the summary field is something that, if you're not currently using, is really a quick win, and highly recommend that you look into that and hopefully use it. It's very beneficial and pretty easy to set up. Moving on to their next topic is going to be workflow. The workflow is the original automation tool that Salesforce created as part of the automation suite. And workflows can be applied declaratively, which means that we don't need to add any Apex code. It uses a single if-then statement and executes to a single object. One other great examples and benefits of a workflow specifically is that it can send outbound emails. And you can see on the little table on the left some capabilities for the workflow. Being able to send out an outbound message without code is pretty neat. And this means that you can notify a prospect or a client automatically via email based on a change to Salesforce. So when we take a look at the demo for the workflow, you'll see this a little bit better. But essentially, workflow rules are broken down in two main components. There is a criteria, that's your if and then statement. So in other words, what must be true of the record for the workflow rule to execute the associated actions. And then there's the action component, which is then if the statement is true, what does the record need to do? When a record meets all the criteria for workflow rule, that rule's actions are then executed. And there are two options when executing that action or those actions. One is an immediate action. For example, if the statement is true and you want the workflow to automatically update a field to a certain value, that can be done immediately. The other option is a time-dependent action. And in that case, say you want to have a 10-day delay before record closes. So you can set either an immediate or a time-dependent action when the criteria is met. So let's talk a little about some of the pros for workflow. The first one is that it's fast and easy. This is probably by far one of the easiest workflows to use. It is button click friendly, and it will trigger based on a set of criteria. It can send out the outbound email without code. And as I mentioned, it can support time-based actions. In terms of the cons, it is limited. So you can only have one if-then statement. From an organizational perspective, each set of criteria requires a new workflow rule. So that means that you may have many workflow rules for the same workflow process. And from a management perspective, you have no way of knowing what actions are in the workflow without actually going into the workflow to look it up. So it can be a little annoying to figure out if you have a list of workflows, what they do, without actually having to go inside and figuring out what they do. All right. Now let's go ahead and move over to the demo. I'll hand it over to you, Dave.
Fantastic. And we'll go back into the screen here. And again, we're going to start out in the setup screen and use the quick find. And we're going to type workflow. And you're going to see there's a number of different things that come up under workflows. We're just going to type workflow rules. So we want to create a workflow here that's going to look at the account and stage of the count and the count type and the stage of an opportunity. If the account is, for instance, a prospect and the opportunity stage is prospective, meaning it's a new opportunity, it's just been created, we want to set a task for the account owner to call that account within 7 days and touch base. We want to have a high touch kind of a relationship with our account. So if it's a new account, meaning it's a prospect, and it's a new opportunity, meaning it's in the prospective stage, we really want to have high touch so that we get those accounts to really feel like we care about what they're You know, we care about their business and their value to us as a company. So what we're going to do is, we're going to say, if the account is a prospect, the opportunity stage is in the prospective stage. We're going to add a task for the account owner to call that account within 7 days. All right, so let's just start out immediately. You can see I don't have any workflow rules in here, and I'm going to click on New Rule. And since this activity is taking place on 2 different objects, the account and this opportunity stage are part of the equation for this. But the opportunity stage is really going to be the key thing, because when we create a new opportunity, that's when we want this workflow to fire. So the opportunity is going to be the key object for this particular piece of workflow. So I'm going to select opportunity, and as I always, hit next in the wizard. So we can call the rule name what we want, but let's just call this to notify. Yep, I've got it right there. Notify the contract team of, no, not contract, notify account owner of new opportunity. Okay. And we're going to do this when the record is created. Okay, so we want to fire this one off in the beginning. Our options here would be to do it when it's created and do it every time it's edited, no matter how it's edited. Or we can say we want to do it when it's created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet the criteria that we're going to set below. So the difference between the second item and the third item there, the created and every time it's edited, when it's created and every time it's edited, if you went in and changed anything, if you went in and changed a date, it's going to fire. If you went in and changed the number, it's going to fire. The third option, created anytime it's edited to subsequently meet criteria, is it's only going to fire if the criteria that we set below goes into that state. So even if you change a date on something, if it's not part of the criteria, it's not going to fire this workflow. So these are important distinctions to make here. So we're going to just set this when it's created because we want to know it's been created, and we want that notification to go out. So let's just go down here to our criteria. Now there's 2 ways to do criteria. You can either fill in the field values here. And these are all going to be ands. So it's this rule and this rule and this rule. Or if you have a more complicated rule that you want to put in where it's this or that, or this and this or that, then you can change this here, go to formula evaluates to true, build your formula using the criteria and the ands and the ors, and then when that happens, then that rule fires. So if you're going to do something simple, use criteria are met. If you're going to do something more complicated, you're going to want to use the formula evaluates. Since what we're doing is really we're just checking on the type of account and the stage of the opportunity, we need both of those to be true. We can do it right here. So I'm going to go in, and the first thing I'm going to check is to say the account, and I'm going to scroll down to the account. Now the account comes up in here because it is the master record over the opportunity. So we can look at all of those values and connect to them. So I'm going to go down and hit account stage. Account type is what I want. I missed it. I went past it. Account type. I missed it again. There it is. Went past it twice. Sorry about that. So account type equals, and we're going to say prospect. That means this is not an existing customer. You can see we've got different customer states here. It's not a partner. It's not an existing customer. It's a prospect. It's somebody new, and we want to show them the love. So under opportunity, we're going to go to stage, and opportunity stage is going to be equal to prospecting, which means this is a brand new opportunity. So again, here are rules. This rule, account type equals prospect, and opportunity stage equals prospecting. We want this rule to fire. So let's hit save and next. And that's set up the basis for what will trigger this rule. Now we need to add an action. And again, what we want that action to be is we're going to go in, do a new action, a new task, because we're assigning a task to the account owner. We're going to say this new task is going to be assigned to, and when you click here, you get options. You can assign it to a specific person, or if you click under user, you can assign it to a role, which means it'll go anybody who gets who's part of that role will get this as a task. You can assign it to the owner of the record, either the account owner or the opportunity owner, or you can assign it to the creator, so whoever is creating the opportunity would get this task. In our case, we want to assign it to the owner, and that owner is the account owner. What this would allow to happen is you could have your inside salespeople add an opportunity to account, and the account owner will be notified that they've got a task. So let's select account owner, and the subject is going to be follow up with new account, and the unique name gets created. We're going to say the status for this is not started. You can see you can select statuses to put it in. We're going to say the priority is high because it's important that they do this. Now, the due date, and we said we want them to do this within 7 days. So we're going to say the due date is going to be based on the rule trigger date. You can see there are a number of other rule dates that you can select from, but we want it on the rule trigger date because we want to know when that opportunity is created. If that's a prospect, immediately put this on their calendar. So we're going to say based on the rule trigger date plus 7 days. So those are the criteria for them to be able to follow up on this task. You could put additional information down here to say make sure you follow up with this client or whatever you want to do. We don't need that in there right now for the purposes of this and to save some time. So I'm going to hit save. And now we can review our rule. Our rule is going to be when this criteria gets triggered, do this thing. And you could add additional, as you can see, you can add email alerts, field updates, outbound messages. You can have a flow trigger that's launched. You can do a number of things. If you have existing actions that you've already defined, you can reuse them in another workflow. You don't have to define it each time you do one of these workflows. If you always want it to do that thing, you can create a single action and then reuse it in other workflows. Down here is where we were talking about, and what Oleg was talking about, time-dependent workflows. So we could have done this as a time-dependent workflow to say, I want to add this to the person's task list in 7 days. And then in that case, we would create this action to say, add it in 7 days after the day. But what we want to do is we want to have it due in 7 days. So it's going to go on their task list immediately with a due date of 7 days from now once that opportunity is created. So I'm going to hit done. And the important thing that you have to do once you have it done is to make sure you hit activate. It will not fire if it's not activated. So let's activate it. All right, so now let's go over to opportunities because that's where we created this rule. And let's create a new opportunity. Oops, let's find one that's a prospect first. All right, oh, I know there is a prospect. I know which one's a prospect. Let's do this. New opportunity. And we're going to go to my old friend Bob. Bob's new opportunity. It's going to be Bob's House of Wicker. See, Bob's House of Wicker is a prospect. We're going to select that in there. We're going to add some additional things. This is a new, we're going to say it's a new customer. The lead source is through the web. The amount is unknown at this time, but we're going to say we want to close it by the end of the month. So the stage is prospecting, as we said. So that's where we are. We could add additional information here, but none of it is mandatory. So let's just go ahead and hit save. All right, so we've saved our new opportunity. There it is sitting out there. Bob's House of Wicker's got a new opportunity. And what we're going to do now is just, you look down here, a follow-up with new account record was just created with a due date of 7 days from today, 17th. We're going to the 24th. It has not started, and it's a high priority. And it was assigned to me because I'm actually, if you go back to Bob's account, I own Bob's account. I'm the account owner. Had it been owned by somebody else, it would have said that person's name. But you can see there it is, and you can go down and scroll down. Although that was created on the opportunity, it's also showing up under the account activities. It's an important activity, and I better get on the phone and get them called. All right, Oleg, back to you. Let's talk about the next thing.
Sweet. Thank you, Dave. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the best practices for workflow. I'm going to start off, and it's going to sound a little strange, but I'm going to say that if at all possible, replace your workflow with what we're going to be covering next, which is a process builder. And I'll explain why as we get there, but if you can, replace them. This is a little bit more techy, but when you do create a workflow, especially for those that have maybe inherited a Salesforce system that has been out for many years and you've got a lot of triggers and other workflows, but when you do create a workflow rule, just replace any Apex triggers because you don't want those to be active and having a conflict. Keep a note that if you have a workflow rule on a custom object, it will be deleted if the custom object is deleted, and you can use a developer console to debug the workflow rules. All right, now with that, let's jump over to Process Builder. And Process Builder is going to be your next best friend. It includes almost all the functionality that's available in the workflow rule and more. And one of the really neat things about it is that a single process can do what it would normally take multiple workflows rules to do. And that's why it is recommended that if you have workflow rules, try to get as many of them out and replace with Process Builder. You'll be able to streamline and clean up your environment. Now, Process Builder, they're usually generated or initiated based on records being created, changed, and or sometimes when they reach a certain age. So here on the left, you can see all the capabilities. Let's talk a little bit about the pros and the cons, and then we'll jump into another demo. So the pro of the Process Builder is that it is user-friendly. So you have a clear user interface that also allows you to do a point-and-click functionality, but now you have the ability to have multiple if-then statements. You can combine multiple workflows. That's a really big plus. Multiple if-then statements. You can also update child records. And on the con side, you cannot edit the Process Builder once it is created. However, you can clone it and make the updates, and they'll all be kept in the same records. So while you can't edit it once it's created, Salesforce has provided some capabilities that allows you to manage them effectively. The troubleshooting is not great. You can't tell who created or when the Process Builder was created or the ID for the process. The troubleshooting has to be done in a debug log. Error messages, you cannot specify error messages as well. On the validation side, the processes did not trigger validation rules, and therefore that can invalidate data. So that's an important note, that if you have applied specific validation rules in your fields, just know that the Process Builder will not trigger those rules. And it does not support user interaction, but the one that does, we'll talk next. With that, I am going to turn it over to Dave once again to do a little demo.
Sounds good. So as Oleg mentioned, it's a much more user-friendly type of environment to work in, and I'll show you why in a second. I want to make sure that I'm sharing my screen here. From my, again, from setup, if you type in Process Builder, it'll take you right down there. Click on that. You'll see I don't have any in here yet, otherwise it would list them for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit New. And what you're going to find out here is how much easier it is. So from a sample perspective, when you get to a certain point in your opportunity, it hits a certain stage. you know, here at GSI, we like to make sure once it hits a certain stage, we start working out on contracts, a master services agreement or something to that effect needs to be generated and begin to be reviewed by legal at the client site. So what we want to do here is we want to have, when an opportunity hits negotiation or review stage, we want it to automatically create a contract record to start 30 days, for the contract to start 30 days after the close date of the opportunity. Now, the opportunity hasn't completely closed yet, but it's hitting a negotiation review stage, and at that point, we want to start moving some paperwork around so that we can be ready to hit the ground running within 30 days of the close date here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just call this really quickly opportunity contract process. And again, you want to put a description in. For the sake of time, I'm going to be skipping that, but you want to put a description in so that you can document what these things are really doing. And we want that process, as you'll be able to see here, we want that process to start when a record changes. We can also have other things happen. If events occur, we want this to run, or we can actually call a process from another process. So you could have a parent process that's calling sub-processes. In our case, we want, when a record changes, to fire off this process. So you can see immediately this looks completely different than the workflow environment we were just working in. This is more flowchart oriented. If you're comfortable with drawing flowcharts or reading flowcharts, this is a lot easier to work with here. And obviously, you just go to start, and the first thing we're going to do is say, what object are we acting on? Well, since we're checking on the stage of an opportunity, it's going to be the opportunity record. And there's our opportunity. And we're going to start this process again, like before. We can start it when it's created, or we can start it when the record is created or edited. We're going to start it when it's edited, created or edited, as long as it hits this stage, and we'll proceed there. Okay, so now we said this process is about this opportunity. We need to add criteria, and we define that criteria. That criteria is, we're going to call it goes to negotiation. And the conditions that we're going to set for this criteria, and the reason you want to use criteria name here is so when you read this flowchart, it actually makes sense what's going to happen. So we're going to go to, and we're going to say that the criteria are on the field list. These are the opportunity fields, and we're going to go down to stage and choose that. And when the stage equals, and it's already defaulted in that it's a pick list, although we could do some other things and do a field reference or formula or something to that effect, but it already knows that it's a pick list, so it's assuming that what we want to do is check for a particular type of or a particular value under the pick list. So and that's exactly what we want to do. So we're going to go over here, and here are all of the pick list values for the stage, and we're going to say negotiation and review. And that's the only criteria we're going to use right now, but as you can see, you can add more and more layers. Now, the nice thing about this, compared to the criteria definition on the other workflow screen, is in here, you can actually set it to be all conditions are met, or any of the conditions are met, or you can customize it and do your and or logic based on having these. So you could say rule 1 and rule 2 or rule 3 very easily in here, if you wanted to do that. So we've got our criteria in there. We're going to fire this thing off when the pick list value hits negotiation stage. And what we want to do is something that we can't do in standard workflow. We want to create a record. We're going to create a record in a different object when this hits this stage. Standard workflow, you cannot create records. So let's go in here and hit an immediate action. That immediate action is going to give us a list of things we can do. We can launch some Apex code. We can create a record. We can send email alerts, flows, post a chatter, run other processes. We can do some quick actions. We can do a number of different things, update records. So there's a lot more things that you can do in a workflow capacity inside the process builder than you can do in standard workflow. This is a key one, creating a record. So we're going to select that, and we're going to say create a contract. as the action name again, so that when we read that flow chart, we know what we're doing here. So now we're going to find the record type. We're going to go down to contract. And the account ID is going to be defaulting in there, but it's saying ID. And this ID is actually going to be the record ID. So let's go into the field reference, and we're going to find a field. And that field, we're going to pull out of the opportunity, is the account ID. And we're going to choose that. Now we can do some other things. We can say we want the status to be set to draft. So we can default that in. And then let's also say that we want the contract start date, as we described in our example, contract start date. And we want that to be 30 days after the close date. So I can't pick that in here. So what I have to pick is a formula. And then I click on this little thing here to build the formula. Now, in here, what I'm going to say is I want it to be the contract, or the opportunity close date plus 30. Okay, so under field, I'm going to look at my opportunities. I'm going to go down to the close date, choose that, and then I'm just going to type in here plus 30. Now, the key thing is you want to make sure if the formula looks the way you want it to, use this formula, and you can see it populates it up into the field here. So that's what we've done. We're going to create a new contract, the status of draft, and it's going to have a contract start date of 30 days after the close date of the opportunity. We could add other default values in there and have those records, those fields populated as well, but let's just start with this. We're going to hit save. Now you can see our create contract immediate action has taken place. Okay. So what we also want to do is we want to create a task for somebody to review this, right? We're just creating a record out there, but let's go create a task too. So creating a task is also creating a record. And let's say we're going to have create task for reviewer. And we want that reviewer to review the record within 7 days of today. So we're going to go down to task, and remember in the last example we also did a task, and in this example we're doing a different kind of task. So one of the things that we're going to do is I'm going to have this review the assigned to ID be the manager of the person who is the opportunity owner. So we're going to do under here, we're going to go to a field reference rather than a formula or a specific field. We're going to click here, going to the opportunity. Here's the opportunity owner ID, but I don't want the owner to be doing it. I want their manager. So I'm going to click into there with a little arrow, and it's going to give me a pick list for that owner. And I'm going to go down and pick the manager ID for that user. Okay. Now we're going to say again, the pick list value for the priority is high. We're going to say the status is not started like we did before. But now what we want to do is we want to say, you need to review this within 7 days of today. So we're going to click due date, and we're going to go in and we're going to do a formula, because like we did before, because we're not picking a specific field. We're going to hit build the formula. Now, I want to do it 7 days from today rather than 7 days from an existing field. So there is a value, or a system value called today that gives it today's date. We're going to say today plus 7. And again, use this formula. We've added that row in there. Now we want to add a subject because we want them to know what we're talking about. So we're going to go down, scroll down, subject. And we're just going to type in a string here for the subject. And that's going to be, please review the contract for this opportunity. And then we're going to relate it. We're talking about an opportunity. We want to relate it to a record, particular record. So we're going to relate related to, I'm having trouble with my alphabet today, apparently. Let me see if I can type it here. Related to ID. And the ID we're going to select is the ID of the opportunity. So what that's going to do is it's going to populate this task underneath the opportunity where we want this contract to be reviewed. So let's hit save. And just like with our friend the workflow, we hit activate. And you can see you've got a nice little flow chart of what's going to go on there. And as Oleg pointed out, you can do multi-layers, add additional criteria. You could either have it stop here or you could have it go on to the next step. It's a much easier user interface to work with. So let's go out and test this. So under the opportunity, we've got that new opportunity we created for Bob, right? So we're going to go out here and we're going to change from prospecting to negotiation and review. Okay, and then when we hit save, what we should see happen is a contract record get created under the contact and a task record get created under the opportunity. So if we look down under the activity history under this opportunity, there's nothing. If we look under the account for Bob, there's no contracts listed. So let's give it a try and see what happens. Boom. Well, we got a failure. All right, well, that's good. That's good news. We got a failure because I mishandled something. I'll have to go back and correct that. Oleg, I'm going to pass back to you while I try to resolve this, and maybe I can show it real quick when you're moving through your other activities.
That sounds good. All right, so we know. Okay, so I hope you can see that the process builder really has a lot more capabilities, yet is still relatively user-friendly, and highly recommend that that's the path that you take when you're setting up your automation. Now, a couple things to consider, and especially, like I said, when you do have multiple things running, that we want to be careful of infinite loops. So one process calling another process that calls the first process is going to create the infinite loop, and that's going to cause some problems. I already mentioned, do the best that you can to deactivate your workflows, what we covered last, and replace them with the process builder. That is the best practice and recommended by Salesforce as well, and we do also. Make sure that you document. That's important. And lastly, test, and then test some more. As you can see, you have to do some due diligence, and things are not going to always work from the first get-go, and that's just reality. So doing testing and running through scenarios is going to help you make sure that you've got a proper process that you want to execute it. With that, let's go ahead and jump over to approvals. An approval process is an automated process that an organization can use to approve records in Salesforce. And in the approval process, we specify steps, so the sequence of steps. We also specify the action. So what do we want done at each step of the, what action should be taken at each step. Within the approval, there are two wizards that can be used. One wizard is called the Use Jumpstart wizard, and that is meant for simple processes. The standard wizard is going to be used for when you need to follow a little more of a complex process. With the Jumpstart wizard, essentially what it does is it defaults some options for you and essentially gets you started, whereas the standard is more manual. You have to really do it from the beginning. We're not going to be demoing the approval process during this webinar, but do stay tuned, as in our future webinars we will spend more time on the approvals. Now, this is essentially what it's going to look like when you are setting up your approval. You can either use the Jumpstart wizard or the standard setup wizard. A few things to consider from best practice, and this is really a big one, and everything else falls underneath it. Make sure that you document your approval process. We use approval process extensively within GSI for when we are doing our internal approvals for, let's say, for proposals and contracts, and it's something that we've developed, and it's something that has been extremely helpful for us to streamline our process and also get away from using email and other means which are easily lost. This keeps it streamlined, and it's much more effective, and it helps us make sure that we have everything in place when needed. Excuse me. Let's move on to our final automation product, and that is the visual workflow. The visual workflow contains some of the similar functionality of what we covered in a process builder. And as I mentioned before, we really do recommend that you start with process builder whenever possible. One of the best ways to figure out whether you can start with a process builder or use the visual workforce is by asking yourself a question: do I need any information from a user? And if you answer that yes, you do need information from a user for your process, then visual workflow is your right tool set to address that. If it's not, go ahead and use process builder. Now, here are some pros when it comes to the visual workflow. It is very powerful, yet it can still be done declaratively without using Apex. You can delete records. That is really only automation tool that allows you to delete records unless you're using Apex. It also supports time-based actions, just like Process Builder. And the other, as I mentioned, big thing is that it supports user interaction. And that means essentially that a user can click a button, fill out a form, and by doing that, that triggers the visual workflow. On the con side, it is very complex. So even though it is drag and drop interface, somewhat similar to Process Builder, there is definitely a learning curve. So if you're not used to developing automation, I would not start with visual workflow unless you have someone there that has done it before, because it does take time to learn and use properly. And there's also not a great amount of flexibility in how you can build it. Error handling is hard to handle in a flow. There are some difficulties to work with pick lists. Essentially, you have to create a custom object with pick list values in order to have them still be somewhat dynamic, and so that means that now you have two places to maintain these values, and that's no fun. It also cannot be fired on its own. It means that it needs some kind of a trigger to execute, unlike Process Builder and what we covered, the other tools we covered before. It is for that reason, in a sense, that it is so complex that we usually don't do a demo of visual workflow because it takes a while to get it set up and running. But if you have questions about it, we're happy to answer. Now, here are just a couple of slides so you can see what the visual workflow looks like. And what you're seeing here on my screen, this is the window of when you run the visual workflow. You have here with one, that's your buttons bar. On the second panel, you've got your palette, Resource Explorer tabs, and those are used to grab the proper elements. On the Resource tab, you've got your resources that can be added to the flow. On the Explorer, You can show all the elements and resources that you've already used or added to the flow. And then the 3, that's your canvas, right? You're the artist, and now you're choosing a lot of these selections on the left-hand side and dropping them in here, connecting the dots. You can also see there's a little green checkbox. This is essentially the start. So you have to mark at where does this process begin, and that can start. You can select it in a variety of different places, but that is a requirement. And here you can see some additional. So once you've set it up, you have to fill out these additional tabs to then really set up your settings, your rules, and that's how you set up the visual workflow. It's definitely takes time to learn, but it is very powerful. Let's talk a little bit about best practices for visual workflow, and then we will wrap things up. I know we're a couple of minutes over, so I appreciate your time. Number 1, and I would say this is true for anything you do with automation, plan before you build. So our recommendation is write out a detailed process. You can use Visio or any other tool where you can really list out your step-by-step process, make sure that you've thought it through, what information is needed, where you're going to get the information from, and then what do you do with that information? What's the logic, and what actions do you want to perform? Make sure, especially with visual workflow, that you use a sandbox environment to test out your flow, because especially with the visual workflow, you can delete records, and you sure don't want to delete records unintentionally in your production environment. So use your developer or sandbox environment, and make sure that you have a chance to test it out. Don't hard code Salesforce IDs. Just don't do it. IDs are org specific, and you don't want to hard code it. You just want to let Salesforce create the IDs for you and pass them into the flow. Save, also very important for visual workflow. Salesforce doesn't save your changes automatically, so it is really up to you to save your work. And you also use Cloud Flow Designer. You saw those little pictures I showed you. That is what you use to design your visual workflow. And sometimes things happen, it can crash, so make sure you save your information, save it often, because you don't want to lose hours worth of work. Test, and just like with anything else, test and then test some more. You just want to go through as many permutations of your flow as possible. I guarantee you that there'll be things you're going to catch that you didn't think about initially, so always a good practice. And with that, just a couple of helpful links. Trailhead, there are a couple of really cool trailheads that you can do. One is for process automation, and if you feel really challenged, I would definitely go for the super badge, and that's your process automation specialist. Just know that for the process automation, everything we covered today, most of everything is going to be in that trailhead. Very, very helpful, good information, take you maybe an hour to complete. On the super badge, that's something that's probably looking for 6+ hours to complete, but that'll get you to be a very good with automation. With that, I will turn this over to Joanne. And Dave, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I figured out what I did wrong. I was using the manager ID, and my the user did not have a manager assigned, so so it was failing because it didn't know how to assign a task to a manager that didn't exist. So I think you've covered a lot of the good stuff. I think the important thing to do is spend some time in these automation trailheads. There's a lot of good hands-on practice available. The super badge is actually fairly difficult. The standard trailhead modules are designed to help you figure out how to use the tools and navigate the tools, and they have some pretty good demos and hands-on work there. The super badge is taking more of business process from a structured approach you're basically interviewing with a business manager on what kind of things they want, and then figuring out which tool to use to deliver those types of activities to the sales organization. They're both very good, and they do teach you quite a bit about which tools to pick and when for process automation.
Awesome, Joanna. Joanna, take it away.
All right, guys. Again, thank you so much. I know we're a little over time, but just wanted to remind you guys that this is part of our ongoing free educational webcast series. Some of our other topics are listed up on the screen for you now. I did see a quick question come through, so I'm going to read that off, but if anybody else has a question, go ahead and send it now. The question was, we are using Lightning. Will these tools also work for Lightning?
Absolutely, all of these tools will work for Lightning. And one of the things about the visual workflow, which was the last item we went over, you can actually create with that tool flows that can be used as Lightning components on a Lightning page. So if you wanted to have, for example, a list of for instance, a list of activities that are underneath a particular record, you could do a flow that goes and generates a form that shows the list of all of the activities underneath that under that record, and then when you put it on your page, it will automatically show up there in the corner as you change your record. It'll show you on the one little panel on the side. All of those activities in one place rather than scrolling down or jumping from one screen to the next. There's a lot of different things you can do with that from the flow perspective to show data that wouldn't normally be on a screen. It's a pretty powerful thing to do with Lightning.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. And I did want to let everyone know that for attending this webcast, we will send you a link to our resource center where we'll actually upload a recording of this webcast. We also do provide a PDF copy of the presentation for you to keep. We also have a survey upon exiting the webcast, and we really appreciate your feedback. When you fill it out, you go into a drawing to win a $25 Amazon gift card, so a little incentive to kind of tell us what you thought of the webcast, what you liked, if there was any additional questions you have that weren't answered. And I'm just going to leave you guys with our contact information. Should you have any additional questions, I didn't see anything else come through in the last couple minutes. So if you have any questions that weren't answered, we're more than happy to set up a call for you to go over that and point you in the right direction, give you some best practices or some hints, anything we can do to help. So with that, if there's anything Dave or Oleg want to end with.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a great weekend. And thanks so much for attending the webcast.